And hello, Sachem. And thank you, Anne-Marie, for inviting me to spend the next half hour or so with your patrons and other people who might tap into this baseball talk. My name is Evan Weiner. I've been a journalist since the 1970s, and locally on Long Island, I wrote op-ed pieces for New York Newsday between 2001 and 2005. The guy you see standing there is Yogi Berra. And Yogi Berra and I had a relationship. I spoke at his museum quite often between 2006 and 2011, and he would attend a great many of my talks, and he would always do the same thing afterwards, pat me on the back, say, "Good job, kid, good job." And I took that as high praise. Yogi, of course, part of baseball in the American culture. In 1954, Jacques Barzun, the French philosopher, noted, "Whoever wants to know the heart and mind of America had better learn baseball." Baseball has been ingrained in the American culture for centuries now. Casey at the Bat, that's 1888. Ernest Thayer wrote the poem Casey at the Bat. Thayer and I had one thing in common. We wrote op-ed pieces for the San Francisco Examiner, him in the 19th century, me in the 21st century. Casey at the Bat, printed on June 3rd, 1888. No author credit. 7 years later, he would read the poem at a Harvard class reunion and take credit for writing the poem, which was, I don't know, about Mike Kelly, New England great baseball player, or maybe somebody in Stockton, California. The poem was given to elementary school kids, at least in the New York City school district, and we had to analyze what the poem was about. What was it about? Really nothing. But the right answer was man's failure, because the mighty Casey had struck out. No joy in Mudville. The mighty Casey had struck out with the chance to win the game. Thayer never really did much with the poem. Other people did. Guys like him. DeWolf Hopper. DeWolf Hopper performed it on the vaudeville stage, performed it on films, recorded it as well. His first go at it, August 14th, 1888. He performed the poem probably about 10,000 times. But it was first recorded for something like that, A Cylinder by Russell Hunting in 1893 and 1898. Hunting was a voice actor and did the poem twice in a heavy Irish brogue. So if you want to listen to it at home, you needed one of those. That is in the Springfield, New Jersey library. It works. You put the cylinder in and it makes sound. And there is Russell Hunting, who twice did the poem. John Kaiser recorded it for Edison in 1905. Hopper recorded it for Victor in 1906. And chances are, if you wanted to listen to either Kaiser or to Hopper do the poem, you need one of those crank-up Victrolas, and you could listen to them read Casey at the Bat. Hopper would commit the verse to a silent film, short subject, in 1922. That was done by Lee DeForest. Wallace Beery did a film version, silent film version, 1927. The comic Jerry Colonna recorded a rendition for Disney, which provided the basis for a 1946 Disney cartoon. Jackie Gleason performed it on his television show in the 1950s. Johnny Bench, Tug McGraw, George Steinbrenner, Billy Martin together, and others voiced the poem, often in orchestral settings, George and Billy, to raise money for the Tampa PBA. If you rode the subway back in the 1900s, you might have seen that sign. Ball game today at the Polo Grounds. New York Giants, Upper Manhattan. The subway went right to the Polo Grounds. One day, Jack Norwood was on the subway and he saw that sign and got an idea. I'm going to write a song about baseball. Norwood never saw a baseball game. He goes to his partner, Albert von Tilzer. Let's do a song about baseball. Von Tilzer never saw a baseball game either. But they come up with a song. The song is about a woman by the name of Katie Casey. And the first stanza of the song, Katie Casey and her boyfriend, her husband, or somebody else, trying to figure out what to do. Baseball games started at 3 o'clock in the afternoon in those days. And Katie Casey was bitten by the baseball bug, which was unusual because women didn't go to baseball games back in 1908 because it was thought to be unladylike if you went to a baseball game. But Katie Casey is bitten by the baseball bug, and she's having this argument with whomever she is with about what she wants to do. And finally, she can't take it anymore, and she screams out, "Take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jacks. I don't care if I ever get back, for we will root, root, root for the home team." They don't win. It's a shame, for it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game. There's a third stanza. Katie Casey has the baseball bug bad. She knows all the players. She knows how to get them aroused. But you know the second stanza of that song, written in 1908. The song would become famous on the vaudeville stage, not at baseball parks or through baseball. Nora Bayes, Norwith's wife, popularized it along with Shine On Harvest Moon. 112 years later, if there was no pandemic, it would be the most popular song played every day from 1908, played at every baseball park, Major League Park, Minor League Park, in the country, from February almost until November. No other song from 1908 has that staying power. Norwith would see his first baseball game in 1928. Von Tilzer would wait until 1940 to see his first baseball game. The first time the song is played at the baseball park, 1934 in Detroit, World Series between the St. Louis Cardinals and the Tigers. Rounders was a very common form of a comedy routine when Abbott and Costello were around. Baseball came out of a game called Rounders from England. There's a baseball museum in North Adams, Massachusetts. It claims in the museum, there's a claim that baseball was played in the Berkshires and Pittsfield in the 1790s, direct result of Rounders. The style of comedy here, Rounders. You have the smart aleck and the simple guy. Simple guy has a lot of questions to ask. The smart aleck gives them smart aleck answers. Very common style, extremely common style. American classic comedy, at least Rounders style, ends with who's on first, what's on second. Type of vaudeville or burlesque act that was very, very common in those days. Now, question, Abbott and Costello, did they pay Michael Musto $15 for the routine? It is generally thought that Musto was the guy who came up with the routine, although others claim that they did. That's not known. Did Abbott and Costello just take the routine? That's not known. But they did take the routine, and they made it better than others. They probably were helped along the way by Costello's comedy writer John Grant and Will Glickman. Abbott and Costello were players on the Kate Smith radio show that was on CBS in 1938, and they premiered their new act, Who's on First, on the Kate Smith radio show. Needless to say, it went over really big, really, really big. And the fact that it was on the Kate Smith show, Kate Smith was one of the big radio stars and big singers of her time, the 1930s and 1940s. This puts Abbott and Costello on the map. They would perform it at the White House for Franklin Roosevelt, for Harry Truman, for Dwight Eisenhower, perform it in the movies, on radio, and on TV. Abbott and Costello were eventually enshrined into baseball's Hall of Fame. That would be in the 1950s, the first non-baseball players to be, or baseball personnel to be enshrined in baseball's Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. Vin Scully is looking at his monitor. It's in the 2000s, about 10, 12 years ago. And Scully, the Dodger announcer, since their days in Brooklyn in 1950, going out to Los Angeles in 1958, looks at his TV monitor and says, now we know the answer to the eternal question of who's on first. Ladies and gentlemen, who? The Dodgers had a player from South Korea named who? He's on first base. He is. Who's on first? There was a player named Watt who played second base for the Washington Senators back in the 1920s, prior to Abbott and Costello making this routine famous. I can tell you one thing. I know there'll never be a player called I Don't Give a Darn. but we do know who's on first and what's on second. Babe Ruth was in a whole bunch of movies, 10 movies, while he was playing baseball and after his baseball career. 1920 silent film, Babe is typecast. Heading Home stars Babe as a baseball player. He stars 1927 silent film, Babe Comes Home, same thing. He also appeared a cameo role in the 1928 Harold Lloyd movie, Speedy. It's a movie that is famous for Harold Lloyd hanging from a clock. Overall, Ruth was in 10 movies, the last one, Pride of the Yankees, about Lou Gehrig. Mike Donlin was a second baseman with the New York Giants. He finally would retire in 1914. He was known as the baseball idol of Manhattan. Career .333 hitter. That's a pretty good hitter. Took multiple breaks from the game to perform on stage and in vaudeville. He retired for good in 1914 and went into the movies. Typecast immediately, right off the bat. Silent movie, which also featured his New York Giants manager, John J. McGraw. Now, it is thought he made at least 53 appearances on film. A lot of film disappeared. The way the film was made, it just evaporated or degraded over the years, wasn't restored. So the thought is he was in 53 appearances on film. Maybe more, maybe less. Nobody really kept track of who was doing films. Nobody kept track of films. Lou Gehrig was in the film 1938, Rawhide. That's about Gehrig deciding he's had enough of it with baseball, decides to buy some land out in Montana to become a rancher because he wants solitude and he wants to relax. He goes out there with his sister. The film opens with Gehrig announcing his retirement at Grand Central Terminal, takes a train, goes out west. It's a forgettable film, except for this. Gehrig is diagnosed with ALS in 1939, and the doctors treating him were able to look at the film, look at how he walked in 37, 38 when the film was shot, looked at all of his movements to gauge how quickly that ALS was ravaging his body. And it might have helped out in some medical research, but at least in his case, they knew how quickly he had deteriorated. The other Yankee star who made a medical contribution was Babe Ruth. Babe Ruth died of throat cancer. He had the cancer. He's one of the first people ever to have chemotherapy to see if it would help people or not. It helped him a little bit, and eventually he would die in 1948. Some of the movies that you might know, League of Their Own. That's Madonna, along with Rosie O'Donnell, who's carrying her. Behind her is, or behind them, is Gina Davis. It's about women's professional baseball, which was funded by Phil Wrigley from about 1943 to 1952. A lot of teams out in the Midwest. And Tom Hanks plays the manager in this movie. Tom Hanks says, "There's no crying in baseball." Character based on Jimmy Fox. League of Their Own. The Lou Gehrig, Pride of the Yankees story. Gary Cooper is in it. Gary Cooper was right-handed, never played baseball. All of the scenes that you see him imitating Gehrig, batting left-handed or throwing left-handed, done with a mirror. Kevin Costner is the catcher, Crash Davis, Bull Durham, talking to the Tim Robbins character. The Robbins character, based on the late Steve Dalkowski, who recently passed away. 10-cent head, $100,000 arm. Dalkowski could throw a baseball over 100 miles an hour, had no control, had some off-field issues. Recently passed away. That's who Tim Robbins' character is named after. Jerry Lewis, Dodgers move out west and become movie and TV favorites. The Geisha boy, and that's Pee Wee Reese, and to Lewis's left is Don Zimmer. Robert Redford was in The Natural. Kevin Costner again talking to Joe Jackson. Field of Dreams. Yankees, White Sox were supposed to play in an Iowa cornfield this year. That will not happen because of the COVID-19 outbreak, maybe in 2021. And Brad Pitt as Billy Bean in Michael Lewis's Moneyball. You might have a copy of either the movie or the book at the library here in Station. Walter Matthau as the coach of the Bad News Bears, sponsored by Chico Bail Bonds. Major League, Charlie Sheen in that movie. Cleveland wins the World Series. Pride of the Yankees, Bull Durham, Major League, Angels in the Outfield, Field of Dreams, Geisha Boy, Bad News Bears, The Natural, and Moneyball. Some of the movies that baseball is a central character in those movies. Homer Simpson, cartoons. Bugs Bunny was in the cartoon. Casey at the Bat, Disney cartoon. Cartoons have always been made about baseball. This one, The Simpsons, the Springfield Isotopes, or the Springfield Nuclear Power Plant team, beats a bunch of former major leaguers, and Homer scores the winning run, and you see Smithers with the championship trophy. Springfield wins it. Sandy Koufax was on Mr. Ed, Wilbur, and there's Wilbur Post, Alan Young. Dodgers are on TV shows. Donna Reed had Don Drysdale on. Herman Munster tried out for the Los Angeles Dodgers. Here he is with Leo DeRocher in an episode of The Munsters. Gilligan's Island, and Jim Lefevre and Al Ferrara, two Dodger players playing headhunters, shrinking Gilligan's head. Ferrara once said, this is a baseball card, Ferrara once said he knew he made it to the major leagues. He saw his face on a baseball card. Al Ferrara from Brooklyn, New York. Johnny Roseborough was in a whole bunch of TV shows and movies. The Dodgers owner, Walter O'Malley, appeared with the Rifleman Star, and one time Brooklyn Dodger Chuck Connors in Branded in 1965. The center fielder, Willie Davis, acted in The Love Machine. Jerry Lewis's Which Way to the Front and The Flying Nun. Johnny Roseborough appeared in Dragnet, Burke's Law, Crass Suspense Theater. They're serious shows. Mr. Ed, not so serious, and Experiment in Terror. That's Phil Silvers with Steve Bilko. Nat Hiken was the main thrust behind the Phil Silvers You Never Get Rich Bilko show. And Bilko is with Steve Bilko. Steve Bilko was a great minor league player of the Pacific Coast League with the Los Angeles Angels. And Nat Hiken took a liking to the name. He named the Bilko character after Steve Bilko. Aaron Spelling, years and years later, was looking for a name for his love boat, for his captain. He found the name Moose Stubing. Moose Stubing became Captain Stubing. That gave him the Cloud character. I once asked Moose Stubing if he ever got royalties. He said, no, but I know the captain is named after me. One other thing about the Bilko show before we get to Damn Yankees, Yogi Berra. I once asked Yogi Berra, what were a number of the New York Yankees doing at Fort Baxter, Kansas? On the show, walking through Fort Baxter. He said, no, we're in the Bronx. I said, yeah, I understand, Yogi. You taped the show in the Bronx, which they did. But what were the characters doing at Fort Baxter? No, we were in the Bronx. We took the Cross Bronx Expressway, got off, and went to the studio at that point. Yes, Yogi Berra was on The Bilko Show. The Bilko Show was a work of fiction. Yogi Berra and his Yankee teammates did film the show in the Bronx. Damn Yankees, Broadway in the 1950s. Joe Hardy sells his soul to the devil because Washington is always losing. There are two songs that come out of that show. One is Whatever Lola Wants, Lola Gets, and the other is You Got to Have Heart. Ed Sullivan, my cousin, Jerry Stiller, passed away at the age of 92 the other day, and he and Stiller and Mirror were on that show a lot. Jerry told me a lot about Ed Sullivan over the years. Ed Sullivan started his career at the New York Daily News doing sports and also as the ring announcer for Boxing Golden's Gloves. And that corner and this corner, and here he greets the amazing Mets, the 1969 World Champions, World Series champions, and they're singing You Gotta Have Heart. Speaking of Jerry Stiller, Jerry Stiller, yeah, he was on Twitter, and he was heavily involved in Twitter last week because of this. The character Frank Costanza says to George Steinbrenner in the show, you traded Jay Buhner for Ken Phelps? George Steinbrenner, central part of a number of scripts for Seinfeld show. Guess who sent in the ideas? It was George, as Jerry told me and somebody else told me. The storyline suggested by George, Missing George. Well, that was about an employee of American Shipbuilding in Tampa. And George thought he had some friends that might do him harm. The guy doesn't show up to work on Monday, but his car is there. George sends an all-point bulletin out with the Tampa police looking for this guy. The guy does come in, so I just went away for the weekend. The show becomes a Seinfeld show where George Costanza's father, Frank Costanza, says to George Steiner, "You traded Jay Buhner for Ken Phelps? Board meeting mood." One of the PR guys for the Yankees said there was a board meeting one day. Somebody came in with local food from Yankee Stadium. George said, "I smell food." They moved the board meeting to whatever restaurant was at Yankee Stadium. Different uniforms. That was done in Tampa, Florida. They tried different uniforms. It didn't work, but that was done, and it became a show. George was on the show. Thought he was an actor. Really wasn't an actor. He actually did a scene in the show, Seinfeld said, and it was terrible. We couldn't use it. We cut him out. It wasn't funny. I don't remember exactly what went wrong, but it was quite an awkward situation. Keith Hernandez was on the show. The show was about Jerry and Keith becoming friends and George becoming very jealous of their friendship. Keith Hernandez was paid $15,000 for being on the show and became Jerry Seinfeld's friend, and George would get over it eventually. Yogi Berra. We're going to talk a little bit about Yogi. I hated you who tasted like chocolate water, but Yogi liked it. Joe Garagiola, who had been friends with Yogi since he was 2 years old, once told me when Yogi stepped in and he stepped in and then it was worth $1 million. Mickey Mantle allegedly drank Yoo-hoo. Moose Gowan did as well, along with Elston Howard. This is a Dave Kaplan story. Dave was a curator of the museum, the Yogi Berra Museum. And he said Yogi met the founding Oliveri family in the New Jersey Country Club in 1955. The brand was having trouble getting distributed. Yogi tasted the drink. The Oliveris asked, "What's your opinion?" Yogi liked it. He became a board member. He became rich off of it. Another Dave Kaplan story. And Yogi was there when he told the story. One time I was in the office and the phone rang. When no one else was around, I always answer a ringing phone, so I did. The woman who called asked if Yoo-hoo was hyphenated. I said, "No, ma'am, it's not even carbonated." It's this point that if I was with you, I would let you laugh and then get to the next topic. Yogi sold Italian dressing. For me, it's got everything. Sure makes swell salads. Remember, Yogi was omnipresent in the 1950s and 1960s. He was everywhere pitching things. Hey, I had a car, 1966 Chevrolet. I remember the battery. You have to add water into the battery. Well, Yogi, no problem with him. I add water only 3 times a year. Prestolite high-level battery when we used to add water to batteries. Yogi, pitchman for Miller Lite beer. Yogi, a pitchman for a bicycle. This Christmas, ask mom and dad for a Shelby, the winner's bike. He was also in a lot of places. That's Joe DiMaggio with Marilyn Monroe. Guarantee you that Joe didn't pay for the cigarette, didn't pay for his meal or his drinks at the Stork Club. Short arms, long pockets. Joe and Marilyn, the love story of the second half of the 20th century. They elope January 14th, 1954. They're in San Francisco. 10 months later, Marilyn Monroe files for divorce, citing mental cruelty. And it had a lot to do with this scene. 26-foot Marilyn Monroe in Stamford, Connecticut. The sculptor recreating the scene, the subway scene from the 7-Year Itch, and somebody had a sense of humor in Stamford because they put her rear end in front of the First Congregational Church, and the first thing you saw walking out was her back. And it was also in the middle of that Stamford little plaza. To the left was another church. Apparently, Joe got a little upset when they got home that night. A couple things allegedly happened, and she filed for divorce. Joe wanted stay-at-home wife who would cook him dinner, who wasn't more famous than he was and wasn't making more money. Marilyn could not check off any of those 4 boxes. Songs. Mrs. Robinson started out as Mrs. Roosevelt in Paul Simon's mind because Paul was looking for a hero. We Didn't Start the Fire. That was Billy Joel. Joe Diaz in that song. Jolt and Joe. Did You See Jackie Hit the Ball? Duke Ellington. And Mickey by Teresa Brewer. You probably heard this song 10,000, 15,000 times. Mrs. Robinson, the 45, 45. 45, supposed to 33. The backside, old friends and bookends. And this story has been told to me many times. Tommy Tresh, Johnny Blanchard, Whitey Ford, each has their own spin on that because they heard the story. The background is Paul Simon goes out to dinner with Joe DiMaggio. Joe walks in, looks at Paul Simon, says, "What do you mean, where have I gone? Where have you gone, Joe DiMaggio?" And they should turn to only asked you, "Where you been?" And Paul Simon tries to explain this to him, realizing that Joe's not going to grasp it. "I said that I didn't mean the lines literally. I thought of him as an American hero. Initially, the song was Mrs. Roosevelt, after Eleanor Roosevelt. It's changed to Mrs. Robinson for the film. And Paul played with Ted Williams in the song, too. Genuine heroes were in short supply. Joe said, I'm here. Well, eventually they keep talking and talking and talking. Joe accepts the explanation, thanks me. We shook hands, said goodnight. Paul probably paid for the dinner. Now, Mickey Mantle and Joe DiMaggio didn't like each other. Joe was jealous of Mickey's looks and his ability, and Mickey thought that his knee was injured because Joe loafed on the ball in the World Series in 1951. He fell over a drain, ripping up his knee. Dick Cavett, the ABC late-night talk show host, knew about the Mantle DiMaggio problems, and he had Paul Simon on, and he asked, well, Mickey's upset. He used Joe, not him. And Simon said, Joe DiMaggio just worked better. It's all about syllables, Dick. It's how many beats there are. I guess Mickey did end up in a Paul Simon video eventually. Baseball cards, baseball cards, baseball cards. 5 cents, 5 cards, stick of bubble gum. Periodontists and oral surgeons really rejoice over Seiberger's invention, the baseball card and the bubble gum, because they made a lot of money. That bubble gum, when you bit into it, was like biting into a desk. But the baseball card could teach you how to add, subtract, multiply, divide, and it was also your entree into gambling if you flipped cards. Geography, if you wanted to see where a team was located, you could look up on the map. And bicycle flaps. You put the card in with a clothespin. It whirled as the tires went around. It made that noise. It sounded really, really cool. Baseball. No new songs. No new literature. Another Yogi story. Ernest Hemingway. Ernest Hemingway is brought down to the Yankee clubhouse. And he is supposed to beat all the Yankee players, and he does. Shakes hands with everybody. He is introduced to Yogi Berra. Ernest Hemingway, Yogi Berra. Yogi Berra, Ernest Hemingway. Hi, Ernie. How you doing? What paper you write for? Kansas City Star would have been the answer years ago. Yogi probably didn't know that Hemingway wrote Old Man in the Sea, which featured Joe DiMaggio. There are really no new movies lately of any consequence. Baseball, just another sport. Yes, Homer Simpson is in baseball's Hall of Fame, 2017. Homer is honored for the baseball episode that he was in during the Simpsons run. With Casey at the bat there, John Fogerty's song Centerfield, 1985, the movie League of Their Own, and Who's on First, Abbott Costello, which is played in perpetuity. That's Jim Bouton. Jim Bouton wrote the quintessential baseball book, Ball 4, in 1970, which humanized baseball players. We found out that Mickey Mantle drank, among other things. The New York Public Hall of Fame said that Ball 4 was one of the most influential books of the 20th century. The only time Jim and I crossed paths speaking, Yogi Berra's museum in 2007, although we had crisscrossed and had just missed one another. It ain't over until it's over. Just about over. Long Island Press sports writer Mike Dyer got Yogi to say that in 1973, and it was pretty simple. The 1973 New York Mets treaded water. A lot of injured players, but nobody ran away from the National League East, from the other teams. In September, Yogi's Mets still had a shot at winning the National League East pennant. But time was running out, and even though they were winning, every game that was lost was a lost opportunity. And Mike Dyer enters the clubhouse after the game with all the other reporters to ask Yogi about a lost opportunity. Yogi's team lost. And Dyer looks at him and he says, Yogi, time's running out. Is it over? Yogi says, it ain't over till it's over. Well, think of it. It ain't over until it's over. Yogi has been quoted more times than anybody else before the United States Supreme Court. If there's a fork in the road, take it. Nobody goes there anymore. It's too crowded. Carmen, what do you mean? Carmen, his wife. Yogi, Tim went to see Dr. Zhivago. What's wrong with him now? It ain't over till it's over. Unfortunately, time is running out. The last time I saw Yogi, June 2011, gave a talk. Brian Cashman, New York Yankees general manager, also gave a talk. There was a seminar all day. Yogi was there. It was the last time he patted me on the back, saying, good job, kid. Good job. Thank you, Anne-Marie. Thank you, Sachem Library. Hopefully in the future, post-COVID-19 vaccine or treatment, I'll be able to see you because I do enjoy going back and forth with my audience, but we can't do it. If you need to get in contact with me, it's EvanJWeiner, Evan J. Weiner at gmail.com, or send something to the library. Again, thank you, Anne-Marie. Thank you, Sachem Library. And until the next time, we'll be seeing you. Bye-bye.